There's something very addictive about bird watching, and once you start, it's a fascination that'll stay with you your whole life. It's one of those subjects whereby the more you find out, the more you want to know, and understanding the different habitats of the various species is essential if you want to broaden your birdwatching horizons. This third and final programme in a series on British birds has been designed to give you all the information necessary to improve your chances of seeing what are the favourite species of birds. As a wildlife programme maker, I've travelled the world, but nevertheless, when I return home to my own country garden, I still get just as much pleasure from renewing my acquaintance with the feathered friends that quite literally sit upon my doorstep. Because birds fly, they don't always remain in the area or region to which they're indigenous. Also, environmental changes mean that resident populations can alter season by season. So understanding the characteristics of specific species is crucial to anyone wanting to take their birdwatching to a more advanced level. Earlier in this series of programmes, we took a brief look at the top 10 birds that landed in my garden, and this has proved so popular, it's a theme well worth expanding upon. Keeping a record of all the birds that you see is a wonderful way to appreciate what's actually going on in the bird world, and a photograph will enhance your records dramatically. And at the end of this programme, I'll share my top tips for photographing birds. But of course, before you can photograph your bird, you have to spot it and identify it. To help you do this, the birds that we'll be looking at in close-up detail have been split into categories. Firstly, we'll start with the most widely spotted birds that you'll have little difficulty encouraging into your garden. Secondly, we'll look at birds that are much less frequently spotted in the average garden. Thirdly, we'll head off to look at woodland and field birds that you'll need to make rather more effort to see. And lastly, we'll visit a selection of the birds most commonly associated with water. When it comes to the more common species that regularly vacuum up food at garden bird tables, it of course depends significantly upon the region in which you live. The blue tit, for example, is a very common bird if you go by the population figures. But if you live in a town or city, you are in fact very privileged to be visited by blue tits, as they avoid urban areas whenever possible. Also, no bird should ever be taken for granted, a lesson learned with the house sparrow. Although this seemingly unremarkable little bird was once found in huge numbers across the country, their declining population has set alarm bells ringing throughout the ecological world, and research is now ongoing to monitor the situation. Of all the British tits, the great tit is the biggest and is easily recognised due to its size. Also, with a large black cap, black band down the belly and white outer tail feathers, identification is fairly straightforward. Although great tits are quite common, they're less frequently spotted than the blue tit, which is smaller and lacks the black cap. Nowadays, the great tit's a popular garden bird, having discovered the value of garden bird tables in winter, but primarily it's a woodland species. Any gardener will always be delighted to be visited by great tits, as they're extremely valuable when it comes to pest control, feeding their young on caterpillars that would otherwise destroy precious plants. Undoubtedly, the blue tit is one of the most easily recognised and best loved of all garden birds. With an attractive blue and yellow plumage, small compact shape and gymnastic antics, the blue tit will provide the birdwatcher with hours of entertainment. The addition of peanuts to a garden bird table is guaranteed to attract this species in profusion. For the organic gardener, the blue tit is a must, voraciously eating many of the common garden pests, and they'll also nest quite happily from year to year if suitable nest boxes are provided. Despite being very widespread, the blue tit will avoid inner city areas, so urban dwellers could be surprised at how elusive this little bird can be. It doesn't always follow that the rarest birds are the most beautiful, as proved by the lovely chaffinch, which is one of the most common British species. The male has a blue-grey crown, pink breast and chestnut back, and although the female is duller, she is nonetheless an attractive bird. The chaffinch also has a cheerful, rollicking song, much evident early in the year. During the spring and summer months, gardens will attract large numbers of chaffinches. However, as autumn sets in, they'll tend to gather in flocks and head off to the countryside. Resident populations of the chaffinch have been estimated at over the 7 million mark, and winter numbers have been known to quadruple with an influx of migrating birds. The greenfinch is a much prized visitor to many garden bird tables, and is noticeable throughout the spring and winter months. During late summer and autumn, this species will tend to move to the countryside, often in large flocks. However, if a bird table is kept well loaded with peanuts and sunflower seeds, the greenfinch's favourite nibbles, this species will often remain all year round. With a robust conical bill and distinctive green colouring, the greenfinch is easy to recognise, although the female is much duller than the male and can be mistaken for a house sparrow. The other bird, sometimes muddled with the greenfinch, is the siskin, a species that's increased in numbers but is actually much smaller in size. Christmas just wouldn't be Christmas without images of the red-breasted robin in the snow, but this bird is regularly seen throughout the year. Both male and female sport the characteristic red bib in equal vibrance, but the young lack the bright colouring. However, they're very easy to identify with their pin-thin legs. Robins are strongly territorial, reacting aggressively when other birds get too close, but they're very receptive to human contact, and with careful encouragement can even be fed by hand. They will also appropriate the strangest items of clutter to use for nesting. Old watering cans, kettles and welly boots are prime examples. The addition of an open-fronted nest box will certainly help to encourage robins into your garden. The male blackbird is one of the easiest birds of all to identify, with jet black plumage and a bright yellow bill. However, the female of the species is altogether more demure, with brown feathers and dark bill, making her much harder to recognise instantly. The blackbird's song is fluent and melodious, adding a musical high note to the dawn chorus, but most people will be more familiar with this bird's shrill alarm call. Blackbirds can be seen almost all year round, only becoming scarce in late August and September when they're molting. By October they'll be back, sporting glossy winter plumage, and as migrants from northern Europe usually swell their numbers, this is the best time to see blackbirds in action. It's hard to believe that the house sparrow, known for being one of the most common birds in Britain, has in recent years been suffering a major decline in numbers. This little brown bird has always enjoyed living in close association with man, but this very proximity seems to be causing the problem. Predominantly, it's the urban sparrow populations that are suffering the greatest losses, and pollution could very well be to blame. Fortunately, the house sparrow is a prolific breeder, which bodes well for the survival of this species. The sight and sound of sparrows noisily nesting under eaves and in roof spaces will undoubtedly continue, but it's a pleasure that any garden bird watcher should never take for granted. The striking black and white pied wagtail is easy to recognise, thanks in part to its constantly wagging tail. Youngsters do tend to be yellow tinged and can be tricky to identify, but as adults are usually close by, confusion is minimal. Despite being classed as a British resident, many choose to migrate to the Mediterranean when the winter sets in. Although pied wagtail numbers are plentiful, they appear most frequently around waterside habitats, but farmland, town parks and gardens can prove equally popular alternatives. This delightful bird was once an exclusive insect feeder, but as insect populations have dwindled with the development of modern agricultural techniques, the pied wagtail is more than happy to supplement its diet at garden bird tables. Crows have a sinister reputation that undoubtedly arises from their scavenging lifestyle. This is a large bird with unmistakable black plumage and a powerful beak that makes short work of wildlife casualties. Also, this species will steal eggs and has been known to take the nestlings of other birds if the chance presents itself. The crow is an extremely intelligent and resourceful survivor that can even carve a niche in the most urban of environments. Despite the crow's bad press, they do make wonderfully attentive parents, and their young will remain with them sometimes months after hatching. Crows also pair and remain faithful for life, and their characteristically bulky nests are a common sight high up in the trees or on rocky ledges. The black and white magpie is unmistakable, with its harsh, chattering call, and in recent years the numbers of this successful scavenger have been increasing at a dramatic rate. Unfortunately, this has been directly related to the decreasing number of British songbirds, and consequently the magpie is regarded by many as an unwelcome guest at garden bird tables. Both male and female magpies have the strongly defined black and white colouring, and even when silhouetted, their exceptionally long tails will make them instantly recognisable. You'll rarely see a single magpie, as they're highly sociable birds, roosting in loud, noisy gatherings. Magpies have successfully populated just about every type of environment available, and this is one species that's unlikely to ever become endangered. The sight of large groups of starlings foraging together on lawns used to be very common, but their numbers have become drastically reduced in recent years. Research is ongoing, but it's very difficult to differentiate between Britain's resident starling population and the influx of migrating visitors from northern and eastern Europe, making it tricky to pinpoint exactly where the problems lie. Starlings are easy to identify, with a glossy, iridescent plumage showing purple, green and blue reflections. The spangled effect, which is more obvious during the winter months, comes from the feathers being tipped with white or buff. The only bird that sometimes gets misidentified as a starling is a female blackbird, but on closer inspection, the species are in fact very different. This next group of birds is absolutely fascinating, because with the right information, the majority of gardeners in Britain can do a great deal to encourage them to visit. Knowing what the specific tastes of these birds are will help, and you'll be amazed at the effect that the addition of black sunflower seeds to your garden bird table will have. However, food is not the only factor to consider, as certain species are seasonal visitors, such as the house martin and the swallow. Understanding when these birds are likely to disappear for the winter and when they are likely to return is vital. Also, it's good to know that, despite the distances involved, they'll often return to the same nest site year after year. There can be a little confusion identifying rooks from crows, but just remember that the adult rook has bare white skin on its face and the base of the bill, and it shouldn't be a problem. Rooks also have what is often described as a baggy-trousered appearance because of loose feathers on their thighs. The call of the rook is much harsher than the crow's call. Rooks are very sociable birds, and in a rural environment will very conspicuously build nest colonies high up in the trees, grouping together to work the soil with newly ploughed fields, proving especially attractive. However, this species is not exclusive to the countryside. Urban rooks are surprisingly successful and are becoming familiar scavengers around town waste bins. The jackdaw is well known for stealing just about anything that it can carry. Not only will food, such as eggs and chicks, come under threat, but also anything bright and shiny will attract this artful thief's attention. Easily distinguishable from rooks and crows, jackdaws are much smaller, with a grey nape, black plumage and strikingly pale eyes that have been described as giving them a somewhat shifty appearance. Although regarded by humans as one of the baddies of the bird world, the jackdaw is an extremely successful species, rapidly increasing its numbers throughout Britain. It's well worth looking out for jackdaws, as they're fascinating to watch, particularly when they're putting on their lively flying displays, which can be absolutely spectacular. Britain is very fortunate to still have a population of goldfinches, and although numbers are small, they're recovering. It was this bird's beautiful colouring and clear melodic song that almost proved to be its downfall, as in Victorian times it was much prized as a caged bird. Both male and female have colourful face markings and beautiful black and gold wings. However, the youngsters, sometimes known as grey-pates, lack the facial colour. In the wild, the goldfinch will feed on weed seeds, including thistle, dandelion and knapweed, but adding black sunflower seeds to a garden bird, often a greater spotted woodpecker is heard before it's ever seen, producing a drumming sound by pecking repeatedly against a tree trunk. This bird relies on old trees for food and nesting sites, only rarely accepting a telegraph pole as an alternative. To distinguish a house martin from the very similar looking swallow, you need to look at the tail. With a conspicuous white rump and a much shorter forked tail than the swallow, identification, although tricky, is straightforward. The house martin also nests differently, choosing exterior locations, such as under the eaves of a house. By contrast, the swallow will invariably go for an interior construction. The sight of the house martin in spring, as it returns from wintering in the warmer climes of Africa, India and Southeast Asia, is always a welcome indication that summer is on its way. This is a gregarious bird that lives in lively colonies, and despite an unfortunate decline in numbers, the house martin is fairly widespread. The little Dunnock, or hedge sparrow as it's sometimes known, is quite difficult to distinguish from other small brown birds. Although the colouring is very similar to that of a house sparrow, it actually has a much finer bill. A close-up view will reveal the adult bird showing a striking, rich, red brick-coloured plumage, but at a distance, the constant fidgeting movements of the Dunnock's wings can be a far more obvious and reliable method of identification. Dunnocks are a resident species and will remain very close to home, rarely flying beyond the safe boundaries of their own territory. The Dunnock has a very complex mating system, and unlike the many bird species that pair for life, polygamy and changes of partner are commonplace. When it comes to identification, it's the male linnet in full breeding plumage that can be most easily recognised, with a red cap, red breast and chestnut back. Females, juveniles and non-breeding birds lack the red colouring, and there can be confusion between this species and the redpoll. However, the linnet is a considerably larger bird. A linnet's diet consists of all kinds of small weed seeds, and a recent decline in numbers may be directly related to increased use of weed killers. Nevertheless, the linnet is still common in heath and hedgerow habitats, preferring gorse bushes for nesting whenever possible. In country areas, linnets can be regular visitors to bird tables, and plentiful supplies of a variety of seeds can help to encourage them. The coal tit is smaller than the blue tit, and with a distinctive black cap, white nape patch and 2 white wing bars, identification is relatively straightforward. However, it's more difficult to distinguish the coal tit from the marsh and willow tits, despite their lack of white markings. Coniferous woodland is the coal tit's natural environment, but as this delightful little bird has developed a taste for black sunflower seeds, it's fairly easy to attract them to garden bird tables. Not only will they enjoy a feast on the spot, coal tits will also store up to 60% of what they take in secret hideouts, which explains how they manage to clear food dispensers at such a rapid and effective pace. As one of Britain's smallest birds, the long-tailed tit is a fragile species that over the years has suffered drastic population decreases when winters have been harsh. Although severe weather will decimate their numbers, long-tailed tits reappear as conditions improve. Those who feed peanuts at garden bird tables provide a valuable food source and are rewarded with occasional sightings of this delicate visitor. It's easy to identify a long-tailed tit, as in flight it resembles a bulbous-headed pipe cleaner with wings. The plumage is also very striking, displaying beautiful pink, black and white colouring. Winter sightings, as this bird searches for food, are best known, but in the summer they can appear with their offspring, a great treat for any bird watcher. The bullfinch is a shy, secretive little bird that is one of the most beautiful species in Britain. With stunning pink, grey and white colouring and a distinctive black cap, the sight of a bullfinch is much prized by birdwatchers. However, historically, farmers and gardeners regarded this species as a pest. The bullfinch is able to decimate buds on fruit trees and will attack garden shrubs to similarly devastating effect. And in the past, they were often shot for causing such damage, no doubt explaining this bird's aversion to human contact. Unlike many finches, the bullfinch is actually a rather sedentary bird, rarely moving beyond a few kilometres out of its territory, except when raising young, which also makes sightings rather rare. The graceful swooping of a swallow is a joy to see, and is forever the epitome of a fine British summer. A distinctly fair-weather visitor, the swallow departs each autumn to winter as far away as South Africa, often completing a 12,000-mile round trip before the next spring. The swallow's navigation skills are so precise, it's able to return to the same nesting site year after year. A swallow's sculptured appearance is geared for flight, and its beautifully streamlined tail will distinguish it from the similarly shaped house martin. With swallows being so adept in flight, they are even able to feed on the wing, hawking very successfully for insects, but swallow numbers have fallen with the decline of this food source. If you really want to be in with a chance of spotting this next selection of birds, it's time to get the walking boots on and grab the binoculars. Those of you lucky enough to have a country garden may well receive an occasional visit from a green woodpecker or a pheasant, But even in these idyllic circumstances, species such as the wary jay will still prove to be elusive. In this category, some birds have only just started to appear nationwide. At one time, the siskin was found only in Scotland, frequenting the conifer forests of the Highlands. But as this type of intensive forestry has spread further south, so has the siskin population, much to the delight of birdwatchers everywhere. For the average garden birdwatcher, to spot an exotically coloured jay is a rare treat indeed. However, despite being a shy species, it's not an impossibility. In the presence of jays, it pays to be extremely quiet because they're very wary, rapidly taking flight at the slightest disturbance. Both male and female sport the characteristically pinky brown plumage with luminescent flashes of blue on the wings. The mainstay of the jay's diet is acorns, and in times of plenty they'll bury them in large quantities for later retrieval. This is one bird that rarely strays from its own territory, but in years when acorns are in short supply, they'll venture forth, sometimes considerable distances, to source their favourite food. The sight of a graceful barn owl in flight is a rare treat for today's birdwatchers. Unfortunately, a decline in woodland habitat has seen a depletion in numbers, not least as a result of Dutch elm disease, which decimated the trees that provided many of the large cavities used by the barn owl for nesting. Also, an increase in traffic in rural areas has contributed to falling numbers, as this species is vulnerable to road accidents. A barn owl at dusk gives the appearance of being ghostly white, but in daylight it's easier to see that the upper parts are a pale, sandy brown. The barn owl is also distinctive, with a heart-shaped face, unlike the circular outline common to other owls. The song thrush is so named because of its melodious voice that can be heard nearly all year round, easily identifiable with the distinctive repetition of pleasant musical phrases. Similar in appearance to the missel thrush, this species is smaller and the spotting on the underside is much less dense. Song thrushes are particularly partial to snails and are very adept at using convenient stones as anvils to crack open the shells. Unfortunately, with the increasing use of chemicals to kill garden mollusks, it's possible that song thrushes are also being poisoned further up the food chain, as there's been a noticeable decline in numbers of this species. Also, the song thrush's nest is vulnerable to attack from predators, such as the magpie. Surprisingly, the marsh tit is not usually associated with marshland, preferring a woodland habitat close to bogs and damp areas. This is a very tricky bird to identify, being the same size as a blue tit, similar in appearance to the coal tit, and virtually identical to the willow tit. The only perceivable difference is the fact that the marsh tit has a glossy black cap, in contrast to the willow tit's dull and sooty black hat. The marsh tit does, however, have a soft call and a bubbling, pleasant song, whereas the willow tit is recognised by its buzzing, rising tune. If you live close to woodland, you may be lucky enough to spot a marsh tit, but they're extremely shy. The willow warbler is one of Britain's earliest summer visitors, arriving from the middle of March, heralding the spring. This can be a tricky bird to identify, as it's very similar in appearance to the chiffchaff. Both species are mainly green, with olive buff underparts, but the willow warbler has paler, flesh-coloured legs. The only way to be absolutely sure is to listen to their song, as the willow warbler sings a sweet descending trickle of notes, and the chiffchaff, quite simply, repeats its own name continually. Once returned to Britain, the willow warbler is a woodland species, but it can occasionally appear at garden bird tables. Migrating birds will depart as late as mid-October, heading for the warmer temperatures of Africa. The kestrel is a beautiful, elegant bird of prey that is now a familiar sight along British motorways. This distinctive choice of habitat is usually sufficient for identification purposes, but a reddish-brown plumage, streaked underparts and pointed wings will distinguish this hovering bird from the sparrowhawk, Britain's other common bird of prey. Despite a preference for roadside verges, the kestrel can hunt equally successfully in open country or in the town. Small rodents are the favoured diet, but other bird species such as the starling and the house sparrow make for a popular alternative during the breeding season. Kestrels don't make nests, selecting a suitable hollow in a tree, cliff or building in which to lay their eggs. As the largest resident British thrush, the missel thrush is rather distinctive, with white underparts speckled with dark spots, and although very aggressive if its nest is threatened, this is a naturally wary bird. In rural communities, the ancient name stormcock is still sometimes used for the missel thrush, because during storms and bad weather it can often be heard singing out loudly from the treetops. It also has a very distinctive alarm call, which sounds just like a football supporter's rattle. Nesting can start as early as February, and once breeding is complete, missel thrushes become a familiar sight, particularly in the countryside, and as autumn berry crops become available, large family groups will gather to enjoy the rich pickings. It's a fortunate birdwatcher that gets to see a green woodpecker in close-up, so named because of its distinctive green plumage. Although this is an unlikely garden visitor, if there are plenty of trees around, it's always a possibility, particularly when ants, a great green woodpecker delicacy, are available. Both male and female are green, but each has a moustache streak, red on the male, but black on the female. This bird has the old country name of yaffle, which aptly describes the wild laughing sound that is the call of the green woodpecker. Trees not only provide safe, well-hidden nesting sites, but also harbour a variety of tasty insect life under the bark for the green woodpecker to feed on. The buzzard is a dramatic bird to watch, whether it be swooping purposefully, hunting its unsuspecting prey, or statuesque, perched majestically on a tree, telegraph pole, or roadside post. Surprisingly, for such a spectacular bird, the buzzard is common throughout Great Britain and is particularly well represented in well-wooded, hilly, or mountainous areas. This species is very similar to the golden eagle, but as the larger eagle is extremely rare and confined to Scotland, confusing the two birds would be an unlikely occurrence. The buzzard does, however, have a much blunter head outline and proportionally shorter wings, yet the markings on the underparts are subject to individual variation. Rabbits form the mainstay of the buzzard's diet, but carrion, mainly road casualties, can be equally acceptable. The nuthatch looks like a miniature version of a woodpecker and has an amazing talent for walking down a tree trunk headfirst. This remarkable habit alone identifies the nuthatch, which has colourful blue-grey wings and pinkish-brown underparts. The nuthatch gets its name from its skill at splitting open nuts and acorns by wedging them into suitable crevices and hammering them with its strong black bill. This is a resident tree-creeping species that is fairly widespread throughout central and southern Britain, wherever woodland or mature trees flourish. Nuthatches are quite tricky to spot, not because they're particularly rare, but because they're rather sedentary, hardly ever moving more than a few miles from the area of their birth. Although the Normans are generally accredited with the introduction of the pheasant to Britain, they possibly arrived much earlier, imported by the Romans for food. The male pheasant is instantly recognisable, with bright, colourful plumage and characteristically long tail, but the female is very dull by comparison, which is undoubtedly far more suitable for camouflage while sitting on the nest. Today, many pheasants are reared exclusively for food, and the meat of this bird is still considered to be a delicacy. Nevertheless, there are many wild pheasants living in the countryside, and for the rural bird watcher, they're frequent visitors to well-stocked garden bird tables. In the early spring, the male pheasants fight fiercely for control of territory, loudly crowing to attract a mate. One of the earliest introductions British children get to birdwatching is feeding the ducks on the pond at the local park. Squabbling, bold, argumentative waterfowl will make straight for youngsters clutching stale bread rather than flying away at the slightest movement as most birds do. This isn't to say that this section is child's play, far from it. The wetlands of Britain consist of complex ecosystems that birdwatchers certainly enjoy, and there are many RSPB and private trust reserves that are dedicated ornithological centres attracting visitors, both human and the feathered variety, from all over the world. As well as featuring classic wetland species, this programme wouldn't be complete without a glimpse at the delightful kingfisher, a truly royal treasure by anyone's standards. The coot is an all-black water bird that is immediately identifiable with a white bill and white shield on the forehead. Closely related to the moorhen, the coot is actually a far more aquatic species, benefiting from lobed toes to aid efficient swimming. This is certainly one of the noisiest birds on the water, and their unmistakable pinging metallic call can be heard in any location where they're common. The majority of the coot's diet is made up of water plants, which they're very adept at diving for. Consequently, a deep aquatic habitat is required, and larger stretches of water, such as gravel pits and reservoirs, provide a perfect environment. However, smaller ponds and rivers that have deeper spots are equally well favoured. When a moorhen is out on the open water, it's very easy to identify. With dark grey and brown plumage, the bright red forehead shield and yellow-tipped beak are the most obvious characteristics. A rear view will also quickly determine this species, as a flash of a white undertail distinguishes the moorhen from other birds. Moorhens are widespread over ponds, lakes, marshes and rivers. However, they do spend considerable amounts of time amongst waterside vegetation and can often be seen feeding in open fields at some distance from the water. This is a strongly territorial species, and they can be quarrelsome when it comes to defending their boundaries. Moorhens nest amongst water plants, but they'll also occupy the abandoned nests of other birds. The reed warbler is a member of a large worldwide family and is a summer visitor to the British Isles, arriving in April and departing in late August for the warmer temperatures of Africa. As this bird's name suggests, it lives amongst reed beds and marshes and has an uncanny knack for sliding up and down a vertical reed with all the grace of a gymnast. This is quite a difficult species to spot, as it'll rarely fly far from the safe cover of vegetation. With a streamlined shape, the reed warbler's colouring is sandy brown and creamy white, giving it perfect camouflage in its natural environment. Reed warblers' nests are often targeted by the cuckoo as an ideal place to deposit their eggs. The great crested grebe is the largest of the grebe family in Britain and is a resident species. With dark crest and ear tufts, identification is straightforward. However, in winter they'll lose these, and a migrating species, the red-necked grebe, can often cause misidentification, as the two birds look very similar at this particular time of the year. Great crested grebes are most attractive to watch, and in the mating season will display an elaborate, beautiful courtship ritual. They're frequently seen on lakes, reservoirs and gravel pits, thankfully in good numbers today. During the 19th century, this species faced extinction, hunted for their handsome plumage to adorn grand Victorian hats, but with protection, the great crested grebe's natural balance has now been restored. Of all birds resident in Britain, the kingfisher has to be one of the easiest to identify, with its bright orange breast, iridescent blue back and long dagger of a bill. However, it's a species that only the dedicated birdwatcher will ever get to see, with luck also playing a vital part. As the kingfisher's apt name implies, the bird is a fish-eater that'll watch the water carefully from a shaded tree branch or riverside post, swiftly diving to secure its prey. Once captured, the fish is then beaten until dead, when it can be swallowed head first. Kingfishers nest in tunnels excavated out of the riverbank, and the sight of an adult bird returning to feed its young is an absolute delight. Time is now firmly against us, and the proverbial curtains are due to fall on this production. I've endeavoured to bring to the small screen the closest and most informative shots to help identify birds that are often only fleetingly present in our sightlines. I've concentrated on some of the smaller species much of the time, as they're the ones who are the hardest to actually see, and often they're the ones with the greatest camouflage. This year, my garden has seen several changes, with fleeting visits from siskins, short-term bombardments by families of long-tailed tits, and a single elusive nuthatch that's not waited for long enough for me to set up the cameras to improve my library. A definite case of nut and run. The dove family has increased to 27, and indeed they now jump all over me when I go out to top up the feeders. The rabbit population seems to have decreased, but I've been invaded by a pushy rat family, no doubt finding the seed droppings around the bird tables an ideal larder. Regrettably, in the interest of the family health, we may need to take action, even though I treat this environment as a sanctuary. Although the magpies can test my patience a little sometimes as they bully the smaller birds. And if you've now managed to encourage and indeed hold regular visitors to your own garden and you want to capture them to camera, either video or stills, then here's a few tips that may make the project more successful. Half the problem is getting close enough to make for a worthwhile picture without having to use a sports journalist's telephoto lens. I have a small shed which I tow about to the garden at regular intervals so that the birds are used to mobility of otherwise static perches. I use the barbecue trolley parked just 2 feet from feeders and then replace it with a tripod when filming. The lawnmower and wheelbarrow serve the same purpose. If you've got a patio door, bring a mobile bird table 2 feet from the gap in the doorway and set the tripod so that the curtains are all but wrapped around it. The birds will get used to it and overcome their trepidation with desire for the very best quality seed that you can obtain. Irresistible goodies such as mealworms, locusts, black sunflower seeds are all useful teasers. Masking off the back of nut holders pushes the birds to the front and sides, where you can achieve the best shots without frustration. Taping over seed feeder apertures also controls which angles the birds feed, and indeed only filling the lower half of a nut feeder and tape around the back is a good trick for getting woodpecker exactly where you need him to dangle. Daily changes of water encourages many visitors to stop over, and although some don't stay long enough to unpack the Kodak, the satisfaction of a bird well spotted and identified is a worthwhile reward for all the effort. I hope you've enjoyed your time in my garden and surrounding woodlands. Times have changed a great deal since my dad and I innocently but indeed ignorantly collected birds' eggs from nests just 4 decades ago. Now my children wouldn't even think of such piracy, and hopefully they'll continue to enjoy the fruits of my bird garden for many years, passing on the tips and education of this relaxing and delightful pastime to their own generation of wild bird lovers.